Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 3rd of February 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We'll be joined by live Skype link by Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches. Lot going on at the moment. Before we get to momentous events, David Cameron's equivalent of peace in our time. Quick comment on the weather. Cold, bright and sunny here in Plymouth, and that seems to be the case across the country. Glasgow the same, Manchester the same, London, Wales, beg your pardon, and Hampshire, and sunshine in Holland as well. So just a couple of opening comments really before we bring in Alex Thompson. Of course, there is no paedophile scandal. It's all utter nonsense. The Daily Mail, top of the tree here, reporting that the police investigation into top paedophiles in Westminster in the establishment, Operation Midland, it's all going to be closed down because, well, it was a little bit of a shambles. The witnesses were all telling lies. And of course, as everybody knows, everybody at the top of the tree in Britain is squeaky clean. So the real headline is no paedophiles in Westminster or the establishment. There is absolutely nothing to see. Well, this is a particularly interesting headline as in the last few days, UK Column has been speaking to Metropolitan Police officers who tell us that yet more police have come forward and not only come forward to whistleblow on the close down of high-level paedophile investigations, they are now starting to group up in order to protect themselves. And the reason for this is that with the close down of the high-level paedophile investigations comes threats, intimidation, bullying, to the extent that a number of policemen and women have committed suicide. This is the haste which the British establishment wants to close the lid on the fact that, of course, paedophiles are operating in and around the British government and the establishment. Those policemen and women, some of them driven to suicide simply because they stood up and blew the whistle on the fact that politicians, assisted by top-level police men and, of course, people in the judiciary, have been closing down those investigations. Nothing to see. Don't worry about it. Well, if we come in a different direction, we were particularly interested to get this email, which was warning us about Common Core in America. Now, if you're not familiar with Common Core, we'd encourage you to go and have a look at it. This is the new method of teaching in American schools, and we predict that unless we say no, this will be drifted into UK. What is it about? Well, let's have a look at a sum. Here we are. Subtract. Failing on, or a typo, I'm going to say there, typo. Subtract 13 from 43. We should, I think, get 30, but this is not how it's done anymore. Let's have a look. Really excellent video here by an American lady, which we've given you the address for. Go and have a look. But she's holding up a piece of paper where she's actually showing how the Common Core method of making that subtraction works. First of all, the 43 minus 30 is put on one line, and then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps where subsequently you add the numbers highlighted in that column, and that will give you the correct answer. Many people, of course, saying this is nonsense, but that's not the case. This is a dangerous attack on the minds and intelligence of our children. And the key question is, individuals are responsible for this program. If we root out the individuals that have brought the program in, we can bring the thing to a close. But there's more on its way. Local Plymouth Herald here reporting that basically children could be banned from having newspaper rounds by the European Union. And many people come up back straight away and say that this is EU nonsense. We say, of course, it is not nonsense. This is absolute common sense because the EU wants to control every aspect of our lives. And the aim is that children are to be dumbed down, removed of skills, initiative and pride so as to form the globalist shelf stackers, as Mike Robinson calls them. And David Cameron is absolutely desperate to make sure that we do not know the truth and the dangers about the European Union, which brings us nicely on to the European referendum PSYOP.
Yes, because of course the PSYOP is ramping up. We had the Mail, the Great Delusion. This is all heading for the 23rd of June as being the date long agreed between Cameron and the other EU leaders. Everything is on course. So the Mail here saying that David Cameron stands accused apparently of delusion after he hailed EU reforms. He claimed it was a breakthrough deal. Despite breaking manifesto pledges, but one Conservative MP, according to the Mail here, described proposals as a slap in the face for Britain. Well, this is, of course, part of the EU referendum PSYOP. The Times, their take on it was that Brussels will have the right to reject benefits curbs. So the Murdoch press aiming for that particular chestnut. That, of course, is part of the European referendum, EU referendum PSYOP. And, well, according to The Guardian, David Cameron has the backing of Theresa May, so whoopee-doo to that. Not only are we being softened up for the referendum then, we're also being softened up for the future leader of the Tory party, perhaps. It's looking increasingly like the three witches every day, if Merkel survives her current woes. But in any case, this is, of course, part of the EU referendum PSYOP. And the reaction from Europe's establishment, perhaps to be expected, enthusiastic. The EU reform proposal is fair for Britain and the other 27 EU member states, according to one of Europe's two presidents, Jean-Claude Juncker. And so here it is. This is the document, and the City of London has put its seal of approval on it. They are absolutely keen to remain in the EU. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have donated hundreds of thousands of pounds to the Stay In campaign. And this is, of course, all part of the EU referendum PSYOP. And in the meantime, we have, of course, the EU institutions, which have we've long been warning about, and they are on the other side of this so-called renegotiation. They continue to be built. And Alex, just before you tell us about this new counter-terrorism centre, what's your take on the actual document?
I'm glad you asked me that, Mike, because as it happens, I have here in my hand a document promising European Union in our time. And even before we get into that, by the way, to answer Tam in the chat box, where does Cameron stand on Turkey? The Conservative Party has long pushed, especially when in government in Britain, that Turkey should accede to the European Union, even though it's 97% in Asia. And that's for the same reason that the fake Republicans in America want Mexicans, cheap gardening and labor. Now, on this document itself, all the fuss in the papers has been about what is in fact Section D of a 4-section document. If you go to that, the actual document itself, which is easily found by Googling the European Council. It is a draft at this stage. You will find that Section A is about so-called economic governance. That doesn't begin till page 5. There's a lot of preamble and guff first. Section B is very short and is about competitiveness. These are addressing the main points that were in Cameron's letter recently to Tusk, saying we're not happy with the EU as it stands. Section C is the one I'm going to talk about, which is about sovereignty, completely disregarded by the papers. And Section D is the one that the papers have written about, which is all about child benefits for non-working EU member state citizens and the like. Well, that Section D has been taken apart by the papers. I don't need to do that. The key point is Section C. The economic stuff is just issuing nice to have wishes, that the European Council is saying for its part, and that's just a collection of heads of government, that they don't want to be nasty to Britain. There's no legal bindingness about it. There's nothing to stop the European Court of Justice or European Court of Human Rights pushing a federalist agenda. Nothing to stop the European Commission from putting ever more text in proposals. The European Parliament can't write its own law. It has to only to vote on them. So here we are then, Section C on sovereignty. Here's the crucial paragraphs. This is the European Council, which is collectively the heads of government of the European Union member states, expressing their intentions to keep Britain safe, apparently. It says references in the treaties and their preambles to the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe are primarily intended to signal that the union's aim is to promote trust and understanding among peoples living in open and democratic societies sharing a common heritage of universal values. They are not an equivalent to the objective of political integration. And then more guff for the rest of the page. So the core bit is Britain has said, hang on, ever closer union has been an explicit aim even before the EU was the EU, when it was the EEC and then the EC. There's been this drive for ever closer union. And now the heads of state assembled as the European Council are saying, no, 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 it's not meant that way, dear boy. That's the extent of the reassurance we've got.
PSYOP, I have to say, it is just so obvious what is going on, the lies, the propaganda. The agenda has always been for total integration into the superstate, and that of course is what the military integration going on at the moment. I had a phone call earlier this morning saying that there does seem finally to be some angst amongst senior members of the military who are beginning to understand they're not important anymore as Britain's military is squeezed into the European system. This is the great lie, Alex, that this is just a benign organisation, a benign Europe. It is really a super state building itself very quickly.
It is a super state, Brian, and the focus is always going to be on the chic meetings of heads of government in that particular building, the Lex building, one of the cluster of EU core buildings in Brussels, because that's where the glamorous stuff happens, the heads of state. But what they meet and discuss in the middle of the night is only ever pre-cooked stuff that's been written largely by the European Commission and its permanent staff of international civil servants who are very interested in further union. The Commission has got there first before the heads of state have ever bothered, or even the national mandarins have looked at the text. And they're always going to be able, as was intended and designed from the very start, we'll come on to that at the book spot at the end, they're always going to be able to pull a fast one on governments because that's their full-time multi-generational job. And as we discussed with the UN last time I was on, these are bureaucrats who are trained from university onwards to think in timescales of beyond their own career and lifetime. We're no match for them if we're just putting up a popularly elected prime minister up for a 5-year term up against them.
When the policy is drifted in through the back door. But we'll be doing some more in-depth research on this over the coming days and weeks, and in particular going back to have a look at how the propaganda system worked around the original vote to drag Britain into the economic community. But Alex, just take us back to this security one here, because in my book at least, the terrorist fear is being used to help drive the European Union. What are they up to in this particular story?
This is a rather dangerous outfit called Europol. It has nothing to do with Interpol. It's well covered that Interpol was effectively a Nazi creation, and no lesser an evil man than Reinhard Heydrich, the Obergruppenführer who masterminded the Czech Holocaust, was the head of Interpol. It was a captured organization. This is separate from that. This is Europol, based up the road from here in The Hague, and its head, shown in that picture there, is Rob Wainwright, an Englishman. And they have announced that there's going to be a detachment of 40 to 50 counter-terrorism specialists within the national police officers seconded to Europol. By the way, how does Britain second national police officers to Europol when we don't even have national police officers for England and Wales, let alone the whole jurisdiction of the UK? But we do. And they're going to be focusing on apparently these inevitable attacks that Mr. Wainwright and his friends know will come from ISIS and other such mirages.
Right. Am I right in saying that Europol building is in the old Gestapo headquarters?
Yes, and if you take a tour around The Hague, courtesy of one of the parties represented in Parliament, you will sometimes be shown the places where the communist and other resistance people were tortured and thrown out of windows or jumped before they had stuff tortured out of them. And you're quite right. As I alluded to with the Interpol stuff, there is a seamless progression from the buildings and institutions used in the Nazi occupation of Europe through to what now is called international police and justice cooperation.
Right. Very serious stuff. Well, one of the things that we continue to watch is what we see as propaganda being put forward to the British public. I had a very interesting email come in. It was this one here. Hi, Brian. Here's another Yahoo News story where the headline has been created for maximum fear factor. It's just another tool in the government's armoury to enable them to drift in the police state. Well, this was the article. Which the gentleman was referring to. UK terror threat. ISIS threatened doomsday attack that will turn children's hair white. I mean, the headline is just remarkable. Fear, fear, fear. And we've got another of those interesting pictures with men apparently to be shot in the back of the neck, and there they are in their orange suits. But before we get into that a bit more, let's just have a look at the article. It says, new warnings have sparked frenzied, there's the word, frenzied searches by MI5 for terrorist cells hiding in the UK. The new attack on Britain will be so severe, IS claims, that it will turn children's hair to white. And that was quoted in the Sunday Times. According to the UK security forces, around 50 high-risk fighters are said to be under close surveillance by MI5, with phone taps and travel restrictions after returning from fighting in Syria. So we're not quite sure where the frenzied bit is, but we've got 50 high-risk people, but they're happily living at home, it would appear. And then the good old Metropolitan Police, remember they're incompetent because they've had to close down the paedophile investigation. The incompetent Metropolitan Police say, we want the public to be alert, not alarmed. The current threat level across the UK from international terrorism remains at severe, meaning an attack is likely. So an attack is likely, it's going to happen, but we just want you to be relaxed and alert. This is interesting stuff, playing with people's minds. Now, in the article, Mr. Shiraz Mayer appears, and we're going to follow on through this very quickly. He had this to say: this is not the first time that ISIS has appeared to threaten Britain, but it is the most pointed and menacing warning yet. So we're all to be murdered in our beds, according to this man. Metropolitan Police, well, they're incompetent and they're in a bit of a frenzy because they're not sure what's going on. So what is going on? Well, the key to it is to have a look to this International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation. And here's Shiraz himself. And if we just have a look at this, straight away we get a connection with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation Fellowship in Energy Security. So this is a very interesting man, embedded in the EU on energy security, but he's also very well up on ISIS, Daesh, whatever it's called today. So this was the bit that caught my attention because he's previously worked for Policy Exchange, Security and Foreign Policy, and he wrote a report reforming the government's counter-terrorism strategy, which was described by Michael Gove, Secretary of State for Education, as brilliant. And Lord Guthrie of Craigiebank, former Chief of the Defence Staff, Senior Military Staff, said it was remarkable. So let's bring in Mr. Guthrie. Here he is, alongside another senior army man in the Lords, Ing, and Boyce, former Admiral. They were picked up for being a little bit dishonest with declaring interests. And here's the Lord Chancellor, but he former Educational Secretary, but he was well up on counter-terrorism policy, and he thought this man's work was absolutely brilliant. Well, I don't know whether this is significant, but of course Mr. Guthrie is a non-executive director for NM Rothschild. So let's have a look at the article again. What caught my eye was the cleanliness of this scene. Here we are in a war-torn country. Basic facilities are shot, but apparently the washing machines are so good that everybody is in impeccable clothing. If you have a look at this in detail, everybody is spotless and well turned out, better than a British Army parade. And the gentleman here in the American combat gear, this smock is unmarked. And if we could see his nails, I think we'd find them manicured because his hands are so clean. So what does this suggest? It suggests to me a highly manufactured picture. We'll just step back to King's College and the ICSR, because here's the head the head man, and we'll come on to him in a bit more detail. But before becoming an academic, he worked as a radio journalist in Germany. But this organisation is now setting the UK defence and counter-terrorism policy. So who are they? Well, here he is, Peter Newman. And how did he get going from a career in journalism? Well, he got some sponsorship from the Leverhulme Trust. Who are they? Well, don't worry, because they all come from the board of Unilever. So totally independent, global corporation helped this man into his position of power. By 2004, he's an academic director of the International Summit on Democracy, Terrorism and Security. Don't worry, though, because this is just tied into the Club of Madrid, World Leadership Alliance. And hey presto, we find that that is also being supported by Open Society and George Soros. Remember, George Soros is the man who's also been helping the Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. Welby, to dismantle the Church of England. What does he look like? Well, it's a bit of a gruesome sight. But according to veterans today, China has got fed up with this man and, as with the Russians, told him to go home and effectively never come back. But this man is the architect of subversive political change and change agents in Britain and overseas. And I believe, Alex, that you've been having a little look at Mr. Soros.
I have, because for the first time, he's becoming a household name to the Dutch voter. Now, the reason for this is that I mentioned before on an appearance that the Dutch constitution is a flexible document, and it's also every iteration of it is open to public negotiation. Now, as a result of that, I think it's through statutory legislation rather than constitutional amendment, the Dutch have now got a requirement, not quite at the Swiss level, but it's getting there, that 300,000 citizens signing a petition will trigger a referendum. Unfortunately, it's a non-binding referendum, an advisory, basically a plebiscite, but the Dutch are now doing that. Now, the Netherlands is also, for the first half of 2016, the chairman country of the EU and its various arms and agencies. So here we have this piece from EU Observer. Dutch Prime Minister takes back seat on Ukraine vote because we now have a referendum campaign forthcoming in the Netherlands. It's a bit like the Irish constitutionally required referendum about the Nice and Amsterdam treaties, but not quite as serious. And here you see Mark Rutte, quite a decent man, an old-fashioned pro-business liberal, and a committed Christian who actually seems to be one, unlike some of the others who claim it. And the point is, he has been boxed into a corner by the increasing awareness of what Soros is up to. And he and his staff have been forced to say, well, yes, we are chairman of Europe at the moment, or the EU, but I think the phrase they use is, we're not going to hit the streets with bells and whistles. In other words, cheerleading. I should have explained what this vote is about. I beg your pardon, that's a bit back to front of me. The referendum is, Dutch voters, do you approve the European Union's signing of an association agreement with Ukraine? You'll recall that's what triggered the 2013-14 unrest and the fascist government that's come in since then in Kiev. And the Dutch voters, much as they appreciate trading with Germany and even further into Eastern Europe, are not, to my mind, going to approve such a thing. Even the ones who are not aware of what happened in Ukraine are well aware that they don't need to provoke Russia and that Ukraine is not really a cultural entity that fits within the EU. It's largely the United States that's pushing this, much more than the EU member states themselves are.
Right, but this would represent, Alex, if achieved, this is more European expansion, isn't it?
Absolutely, but that last point I made there is the key. I've started thinking more and more about if the French and Germans in their national projects don't require further eastward expansion, and even the Germans only require raw materials and cheap workers from Eastern Europe, why is the EU as a collective body pushing for formal political expansion into Ukraine and possibly even the Caucasus to the great chagrin of Russia? And the answer has to be that the pressure and the thinking is coming from the US State Department and from non-governmental groups and commercial groups having influence in Washington.
Alex, who's allowed to vote in this referendum? Are the Irish allowed to vote, for example?
Strictly citizens only. I've looked that up, just like you've seen before with the Irish. So it's Britain that's the odd man out here by allowing so-called EU citizens to vote in national referenda.
Okay. What can we say to that? We're not surprised. We've got this young lady on the screen here, Beatrix. What's this one about?
This blue-blooded member of the European Parliament, Beatrix von Sloot, sits in the European Parliament for the German anti-EU, anti-Euro party, anti-unfettered immigration, a sort of German UKIP. The party is called AfD, Alternative für Deutschland. And here she's on a chat show saying that she has it on good authority from various rumour mills, and she's a serious lady, she's not making this stuff up, that when Merkel's term expires, she will have done so much treason and treachery to the German people that she will flee abroad. And Beatrix von Sloot, well aware that this is very politically loaded in Germany, had no hesitation in saying, well, I believe it's to Chile that she will flee. Now, of course, oh dear, it seems every time I talk about this, I end up talking about the Nazis, and people have a go at me that I've got a fixation with them, but it's a major point to look at. Chile as a place of refuge. That seems to be what Merkel is planning, according to Ms. von Sloot. Now, the main thing is that the German mainstream TV channel who hosted this actually bothered to host it. They would never have done so in the past. And although she's hooted down by her fellow bien-pensant speakers on the panel, she is actually being cheered and clapped by some of those in the TV audience. That would have been unthinkable in Germany even 2, maybe 1 year ago. The camera makes every effort not to focus on these individuals, but focus on the jeers and boos and whistles instead. But there are people taking her seriously.
Right. Well, I heard a rumour that when the British public discover that Cameron's done the same, he won't be allowed to fly. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. So where do we go now?
This is again on Germany, and again this is core mainstream German news, the Tagesschau, which is part of ARD, the main German equivalent to the BBC. And the headline here is keine Rückführung, keine Entwicklungshilfe. No repatriation, no development aid. So Germany is telling the North African states whose citizens are making up the bulk of the bogus migrants or bogus asylum seekers now, that if they don't take the repatriated failed asylum seekers, Germany will close the tap of international development budget for the countries involved, which is Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, that sort of country. What's not being said openly here, though, is that it is only 10% of those who come into Germany who have their cases rejected. 90% are given indefinite leave to remain in some form or another. So it looks like a confidence trick on the public. I also note that in German press, the journalists are spotting that the politicians involved in making these vague threats all come from the SPD, the German Socialist Party. In other words, the bogus conservatives, the CDU, CSU, Merkel's party, are not actually involved in even pretending to send people back. Once again, we see that what Americans would call rhinos, Republicans in name only, neocon types, are more dangerous than the new left, in my opinion, because they care even less about the country and patriotism than the left does.
Right. And this article here from Holland is on the same subject.
Yes, NSC, the most respected Dutch journalistic outlet, has the headline here, Rode polsbandjes voor asielzoekers afgeschaft na commotie. Red wristbands for asylum seekers scrapped after an uproar. The Dutch have been utterly astonished, scunnered, to use one of David Scott's words of the week, that Britain would even have done this temporarily. And they're very fixated, the Dutch journalists, on the fact that the asylum seekers are being housed in places like Middlesbrough, in houses that are subletted to G4S. And the G4S has a policy of painting the doors red. It all sounds a bit not done, doesn't it?
Well, it's sounding very serious to me, because what is coming in is a dictatorship with all the facilities. We've warned about MAPA, we've warned about people being put in psychiatric units. It's all coming in bit by bit, the drip, drip, drip of the anaesthetic, as that elderly German lady said. Well, take us into spying, because the devious shenanigans behind the scenes are part of this.
Yes, if you excuse the rather loud suit and tie scheme, this gentleman, Roman Zuikov, I'll give the caveat that he's a hardcore Putin loyalist, and he says as much on camera. But he has a 15-minute interview available on YouTube We'll make sure that the link is available after the show because there it is. Thank you very much, Mike. It's there already. If you go to that link, it's a very well subtitled 15-minute talk about how the top level accountancy and signing off of the books in Russia, even for defense and security companies, which are native Russian companies acting on contract for the Russian government, is exclusively in the hands of 4 consultancies. These are all US, UK, and continental-based foreign companies, the likes of Deloitte and Touche and KPMG. And the main point is that even if you're a Russian wanting to get involved in top-level accountancy and well-qualified, you have to bite your tongue and join up with these American, Swiss, British international conglomerates in order to go and do the classified audit of Russian defense companies. And Zhukov makes the very evident but well-made point that all the stuff, which goes down to the level of how many tanks each factory can produce, is immediately offloaded to servers abroad.
Right. Okay, well, you've put this headline on screen. Was there a communist witch hunt at the BBC? Was there?
Apparently, the BBC was warned about it but decided not to take any action. The MP involved was this. He was even outdated by the 1950s, bless him. He was a really old-fashioned conservative patriot, Sir Waldron Smithers, in a home county seat. And I'm looking here at Churchill's reply to the concerns he'd raised that there were communists recently entered into Britain from Eastern Europe at the BBC, very much in the same era as McCarthyism. And McCarthy is a much maligned man, really. Churchill, who, as we know, had corporatists driving him behind the scenes, writes back, "My dear Smithers, I've had your letters about communism carefully examined, and after full consideration, I do not think that an inquiry into communism would be advantageous." So even by the 1950s, we have a system where the Prime Minister can have something not done by saying, "I do not think it would be advantageous." Quite a shock to me, that. "We are well aware of its danger," he writes. "As regards the BBC, I am assured you overestimate the extent of communist influence and that proper plans exist to counter any serious threat." So there you are. The United States in that era had McCarthyism and also had the Reece Committee looking into the tax-free foundations. We didn't have anything of the sort because Churchill said, "I don't think it's necessary."
He doesn't think it's necessary, and of course they don't think it's necessary to have a proper investigation into the paedophiles because they don't exist either. Well, we've got a gentleman here with a flag on screen.
This carries through the theme of change agents, George Soros's beloved serried ranks of motivated people. They may think they're advancing the brotherhood of man or whatnot, but here we have a French, almost anarcho-communist movement, NPA, and this is at Dover. You might recall the storming of the Spirit of Britain, that ferry at Calais recently, and they spent 40 minutes on board, these alleged asylum seekers, migrants, whatever they are. But if you look at the video involved, which is on the channel of Taranis, a French channel, I think they're actually sympathetic to the rabble-rousers. You can clearly see very white-skinned French, what should we call them, idealist youth, change agents, Marxists, marshalling these crowds of young men chanting UK, UK with smug grins on their faces, and escorting them all the way to the MV Spirit of Britain, where they spend 40 minutes trashing the joints before the riot police, who were heavily outnumbered, managed to get them off again. So there you see that these signs, refugees welcome here, you see the same in Scandinavia. These people standing welcoming the so-called refugees are quite violent, young, native men, shall we say, and that someone is stirring them up, either paying them or using ideological motivation to get them to do it for free, is getting these people to turn up at sensitive points of entry like Malmö in Sweden or Calais, and funneling these largely North African people from safe countries to their next port of entry.
Right. Manipulation going on behind the scenes, and mainstream media, of course, simply incapable of investigating what's going on and asking the right questions. But all of this points to a massive manipulation of the whole population of Europe at the moment in order to, make a European super-state totally international in character.
Yes, it was back in 1925 that that aristocrat, Karl den Hove Kalergi, wrote his plan in Praktischer Idealismus, Practical Idealism. We're going to come back to the interwar period later when we go to the book review. And Kalergi wrote even then, we must have a mixture of Africans and Asians in Europe for the world government plan to work.
Right. Okay, well, if we've been delving there into the darker aspects of political manipulation, the theme of an attack on our children just goes on. And I think you're also seeing this in reports inside Germany.
Yes, this is from the Münsterland, a very deeply conservative Catholic area of Western Germany, not far over the Dutch border. And the people who put this very professional report together are called Klagemauer, or in full, Medienklagemauer. They're called the wall of complaint against the media, basically, but it's a play on words with the Western Wall in Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall. And this very interesting media outfit is showing how a German father pulled his daughter out of sexualization lessons. She's 8 years old, because she was coming home physically nauseous from the pornographic anatomical detail that was being told her in class. And here they are, the parents involved, protesting outside the local town hall and police station. And as usually happens in Germany, he got a stiff letter saying, you must not make your daughter miss a single compulsory schooling element. And don't forget, Germany, and now Sweden as well, doesn't allow for any home education and vets the content of the curriculum down to individual pages of any private or Christian school that's accepted by the government. So there have also been cases of nuns in Bavaria being visited by school inspectors and having the books inspected to see whether they've torn out any pages with naughty bits on it, because it is an absolute necessity that the children of 6, 7, 8 years old be taught all the anatomical detail, regardless of what it does to them. And this father ended up jailed in the town of Hamm, Hamm, in the Ruhr. But what's unusual, again, showing the stirring anger in Germany, is that these middle-class parents and grannies came out with very angry expressions on their faces and chanting slogans, seething with rage, as you can well imagine. And until now, prosecutors, judges, police officers in Germany have had the upper hand because they've just regarded these as a few crackpots and loons and Christian extremists. But sooner or later, it's going to be the bulk of the German middle class, and then there will be a problem with this policy.
Right.
You see it also back in post First World War Hungary, the Marxist Commissar for Education in Hungary deliberately sexualizing the children. Lukács was his name, George Lukács.
Right, well, that attack just goes on and on. Many people in UK certainly not aware of how vicious the German police can be when family issues come up. So the things that are being reported here with children being taken by social services mirrored in Germany, but in many cases, as I've used the word, it's vicious what is actually going on. Well, we'll just say, remember, Michael Gove, of course, was the man we trusted with the education of our system, of our children in the system. He now moves on to become an expert, apparently, in counter-terrorism, and is in a position of immense power in his latest seat, Lord Chancellor, I beg your pardon. Okay, well, we don't want knowledge to get in the way of what's happening politically, so it seems the ideal time to close down libraries, or not.
Well, this is just a sort of aside, really. Ed Vizzy here has got to win the Hypocrite of the Month award because he is celebrating National Libraries Day, on the 6th of February. He wants to celebrate our fantastic public libraries, most of which he has helped close down. And they are a valued asset, apparently.
Well, of course, that's not what's happening in the public sector, Mike, because, as you say, libraries are being closed and many of them are dramatically reduced in the number of books they stock. And there's now state censorship of the types of books that libraries can have. So
it is staggering how many book sales Plymouth Library has held in over the last year. It is incredible. They're just getting rid of everything.
Yeah, well, of course, books contain knowledge that's difficult to change. It's either there in print or it isn't. Once everything is moved across to an electronic form, then David Cameron's partner, Google, can simply come in and change reality overnight. Well, no money for books, but plenty for war.
Yes, this is U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter, and he gave a speech yesterday to the Economic Club of Washington, and he was giving details of Obama's plans for the 2017 defense budget in the United States. He said he wants to avoid conflict with Russia and China, so I think we can take it as read that he wants no such thing. And the clue came when he stated that Russia and China are the top challenges for the US, followed by North Korea, Iran, and then ISIS. And he said, key to our approach is being able to deter our most advanced competitors. There you go. So they want $7.5 billion for the new European Reassurance Initiative. That's a rise up from $789 million. And they want more rotational forces in Europe. They want more training and exercises. They want pre-positioned equipment, all by the end of 2017, which will let them rapidly form a highly capable combined arms ground force that can respond theater-wide if necessary, apparently. And they also want $7.5 billion to support ISIS. No, that's not what they're doing, is it? They don't really know, or they won't admit. Let's put it that way. So the plan calls for $13 billion for a new ballistic missile submarine over the next 5 years, and that's to replace Ohio-class submarines. So, as you would expect, the Russians are pretty unhappy about this, and the Russian embassy in Washington slammed the Obama administration yesterday. Oh no, what day is this?
Today is Wednesday.
Yes, it was yesterday. And this is for plans that I've just described. And they said, in our view, these steps by the US and NATO are destabilizing and detrimental to European security. They said there should be no doubt that Russia, under any circumstances, will be able to defend its citizens and national security interests. And the Foreign Policy magazine here says, outside analysts expressed surprise at the Pentagon's decision to boost its military presence in Eastern Europe, including well-known Russia hawks like Evelyn Farkas, who quit the Pentagon's top job in October after clashing with the administration for not responding more aggressively to President Putin. This is a really big deal, and the Russians are going to have a cow, is what he said, or she said, sorry. Well, here it is. We've got new NATO units in Eastern Europe. Now, we reported this several months ago. These are now beginning to come online. So they inaugurated six venues: Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and they are going to also be in Romania and a couple of other places, aiming to be live by July 2016. Now, apart from having dinner with David Cameron, which I understand they were eating pig, but anyway, Donald Tusk met Jens Stoltenberg yesterday to discuss the EU referendum PSYOP and also the new EU military order following the referendum in June. Now, I'm not sure that the quote there says, don't worry, Jens, the plan for the EU army is going well. We'll be at war with Russia by the end of next year. I don't know whether that's quite accurate. It was whispered, but my source says it's accurate in intent, even if these weren't the actual words that were used. But in the meantime, getting serious again for a second, MPs have called on the UK to stop funding Saudi terrorists, according to The Guardian here, who continue to bomb Yemen and kill thousands of people. More or less complete silence from the mainstream media on this. The call for funding to end has come from the International Development Select Committee, and that follows evidence given by aid agencies to MPs warning that Saudis were involved in indiscriminate bombing of its neighbour. Now, we have mentioned on this programme evidence that the Saudis appear to be using cluster bombs, among other really nasty weapons. According to The Guardian, the UK government has supplied export licenses for £3 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia in the last 12 months. And most of that, of course, is being dropped on Yemen. So that's a good use of taxpayers' money, I guess. Now, of course, the select committee's on a hiding to nothing here, because we mentioned this story a day or two ago. But here's a quote from it. The Saudis repeatedly advertise the backing they're getting from the US and Britain. experts from the United States will work on extensive reports and develop operating mechanisms together with the British side. And that was according to Brigadier General Ahmed Asseri. And back in January, middle of January or so, they also admitted that British and American military officials are in the command and control center for these Saudi airstrikes on Yemen. So bearing in mind, this is clearly British and US policy. I don't think the Select Committee has a chance of actually getting arms sales stopped. Maybe we should be doing something about that, Brian.
I think we should be trying to do everything we can, because, of course, well, what you say is true, is that the British government is just insistent on war wherever it's going to be, from Syria to the Yemen. Alex, perhaps you'd like to comment on the events with the Saudis.
Yes, I haven't been to Saudi Arabia itself, but I've been very close in Aqaba in Jordan, and that's the point where you can actually see into Saudi Arabia one way and Israel the other. And these days there are actually Saudi diplomatic cars and the cars of private citizens of Saudi Arabia going through Jordan into Israel and shopping in Tel Aviv. I think I'll leave it at that.
Cozy relationship, perhaps we might assume. Okay, well, we're just coming towards the close of the news today, but you were, of course, keen to take us into two books which you thought were of value in understanding what's going on around us.
This is a wonderful pair of books by that indefatigable duo, Christopher Booker and Richard North. Booker is a long-time Telegraph journalist and has exposed a lot of wrongdoing by social services. And that book there, The Castle of Lies, came out while I was still at school. 20 years ago it came out. And one of those books I picked up at the time and thought, oh dear, this is packed of examples with British mandarins gold-plating European directives and making them worse for our fishing industry and farming and whatnot than even Brussels intended. And I remember thinking this is very disturbing and just putting it down again. But we're 20 years on, and we can't ignore these things. And this is their latest book by the duo on the left here, The Great Deception. And it is the definitive secret history of the European Union. It is majestic. And once again, to those critics who say you're too focused on Germany and its plans, I will say that this is the book which has shown me that it was not a German plot from the beginning. Yes, the Nazis came up with the idea of the Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, the European Economic Community, a way of sucking resources out of the periphery of the continent for the benefit of German conglomerates. But the point of this book is, even if you just read the first page, the two quotations at the top, one is by a British civil servant in 1931, Arthur Salter, who was this chum of Jean Monnet, who then left the scene. But Arthur Salter, said the United States of Europe, this is in 1931, must be a political reality, or it cannot be an economic one. And the other quotation is in the dying embers of the First World War by Jan Smuts, that South African premier who actually signed the peace treaties of both world wars, exposed by Carroll Quigley, by the way, as a core member of the Milner Group, the Anglo-American establishment. And Smuts said, Europe is being liquidated. He said this in 1918. And the League of Nations must be the heir to this great estate. Now, the point of chapter 1 of Booker and North, which is the chapter you must read, is that the European Union starts its own history in the dying days of the Second World War. But what we find in this book is that a certain industrialist, Louis Loucheur, was actually tasked by the French government after they nearly lost the First World War, to look at such a thing as a coal and steel conglomerate to prevent France and Germany from ever being able to attack each other again, because they knew the French would lose. So all the ideas that we're told came out of Nazi occupation were actually French, and perhaps you can better say Anglo-French, and came at the end of the First World War. And for those in the know, go back to really 1900 or before. That's when the globalist ideas of setting up a government for Europe and eventually the world first came out. And any official history of the EU that starts in 1945 or later is deliberately misleading you.
Okay. Alex, thank you very much for that. We'd encourage people to read those books. Isn't it interesting? We end our programme today encouraging people to read books. What's the British government been up to? Destroying books. Something that was done by the Nazis, of course. Get rid of the knowledge and you weaken people in their understanding and ability to fight back. On this, on the note of our minds, I'll just pop this one on screen for just 10 seconds. But somebody pointed out to us that the NHS certainly changing in Plymouth. We've now got the Live Well Southwest organisation, which is apparently going to look after us, and they're going to look after us with cognitive behavioural therapy. Just remember that our government says effectively 1 in 4 people in this country will shortly be mentally ill. That's according to David Cameron and his team. And the solution is to apply a bit of CBT to make them happy, even though they're unhappy because of the chaos unfolding around them as a result of the government. So on that slight bit of black humour, we'll leave you there. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. What is the most important thing coming up for UK is this European referendum, the EU referendum PSYOP, as we're calling it. We need to expose what the European Union really is, and we certainly need to expose the sheer deception by British Prime Minister David Cameron and his propaganda team. Speak, talk to people, tweet, email, push the information out there. People are beginning to debate what they should vote in the referendum, and we'll continue to report on it. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow.